All right, so next up we've got Dan 50K Ige versus Damon Jackson. And Dan Ige's on a little bit of a skid right now. And Damon Jackson is rising. His stock is rising. I'm leaning towards Damon Jackson, but I really want to hear the argument that you have to make, Tom. So why don't you kick this one off?
Okay, yeah, sure. So let me do it this way so that we can see at least somewhat of a full screen of who we're looking at here. Still a work in progress in terms of fitting everything on the screen that we need to have. This one's going to be tight. And I think I can almost call this right down to a T as far as what's going to happen. Dan Ige is going to go out in the first round. I think he's going to use his jab. Ultimately, Dan Ige is used to having a reach advantage here. He's a shorter guy by 4 or 5 inches. But in terms of the reach, it's 71 to 71 and a half for Damon Jackson. Damon Jackson is going to specialize on the ground. He has a decent striking ability just going out there and recently finishing Pat Sabatini. Pat Sabatini is a guy that has had chin issues as of late, so looks less good. But Damon Jackson stepped in on short notice, got that fight after I believe it might have been his sister or someone close to the family had passed away or had a traumatic event there. So Damon Jackson going out there with a lot of emotion and getting it done. That was great, but. I think there's going to be a little bit down, a little bit more of like a coming back down to earth here, and this one is super hard to call because I think Dan Ige has some good anti-grappling against the top level of grapplers in the division. Dan Ige has a really good level of striking against the top level of strikers in the division. He's one of those guys that's good at a lot, but not great at any particular area. And then once you get to the top level of competition, that ends up being a problem. The question here is Damon Jackson top level competition? Damon Jackson has okay stand up. He's put people away before. He doesn't have the knockout power that's just going to slump somebody. But like as we saw with Pat Sabatini, he landed a right hand, he landed a left hook, he hit another one, he got Pat on the ground. He was very calculated and he didn't overextend himself. He was conservative. He was very position over submission, or actually, which is odd for him because Damon Jackson is usually a submission over position guy. He can go for submissions and he'll get them, but often he'll find himself in a bad situation. I've watched a lot of tape on both of these two guys, and they have inverse fighting styles. Dan Ige is extremely conservative. He's going to plot forward. He's going to use his jab. He's going to use some body work to try and open up the opponent and start landing. But ultimately, Dan Ige is not a guy who's going to go out there and put you away. So I don't think this one is going to get finished by Dan Ige on the feet. Damon Jackson, I would say the same thing. I don't think it's going to get finished on the feet. Dan Ige has an extremely good chin. However, Dan Ige does show damage well. So I think it's going to go out there. And I think Dan Ige is going to get landed on, but also do a fair bit of landing. I think he's going to throw the higher volume in the first round, and he's going to be able to defend the takedowns of Damon Jackson. So I think Dan Ige is going to win a close round one. In round two, Damon Jackson is going to go out there, and Dan Ige has had a history of dropping second rounds in his career. He said it himself that sometimes he just doesn't come out with the same viciousness that he does in the first round. So I think Dan Ige is going to come out in their second round, somewhere around the middle towards the end. He's going to get taken down. Damon Jackson's going to be able to put some submissions on him, submission attempts. I think Dan Ige is going to get out of them, but maybe in what looks like serious trouble for one or two of them. On the feet, I think Dan Ige is going to have a little bit more advantage because he's going to be the guy plotting forward, throwing jabs. But also Damon Jackson's not someone who's just going to absolutely back up. So I think Damon's going to win the second round, mostly on his aggressiveness and his control time and his, maybe I wouldn't say control time. I would maybe venture to say more of his submission activity. And then finally, it's going to come down to that third round. Who's going to want it more? And ultimately, because, this a lot of times can come down to position and grappling and the difference maker there. I don't think Dan Ige is going to sit down Damon Jackson. I think Damon Jackson might sit down Dan Ige because we've seen Dan Ige get dropped and then pop right back up in a litany of other fights. He got knocked down a couple of times by Mosar Evloev. Josh Emmett sat him down a couple of times. Chan Sung Jung took advantage of him on the ground when it got there. And then obviously the Calvin Kattar fight where he just plotted forward and got annihilated. So if I'm Dan Ige, as the fight goes on, I get a little bit more nervous. Damon Jackson is a guy, he trains at Fortis MMA. I believe he's from Dallas, but I think he's used to training at altitude, and as a guy who, as the fight goes on, he doesn't necessarily tire, and he has really good grappling endurance. So I know this has been a long breakdown, but there's a lot that goes into it. With all of that being said, I'm going to have to go with Damon Jackson ever so slightly because it's a grappling advantage And if he's throwing up submissions and he's trying to get there and he's trying to get it done, I think the judges may see it. But I think ultimately it's going to come down to that third round. It's going to be a close, vicious fight. What do you think, Keith?
I don't even know how to follow that up, Tom. That was one of the most comprehensive, best breakdowns I've heard you or anybody give, especially with such a tight fight. And like I said before, I was leaning towards Damon Jackson. You've completely sold me on him. There's a lot of glaring stuff that you pointed out for Dan Ige, especially like dropping the second round. The only part where I somewhat disagree with you is I think that Damon Jackson may finish this fight in the second with a submission because of the aggressiveness and submission over position, like you were saying, just with how aggressive he is trying to lock stuff up. But you got me 100% on the Damon Jackson side. And what's his money line? I'm having a hard time reading it. It's small on my phone screen.
Dead even. It's minus 110 across the board. And what I will say too about your point is, yeah, I could definitely see, Damon Jackson getting a takedown, going for the submission, going for something like a guillotine or something like that. And then ultimately, or maybe being on the back, going for the submission, falling off a rear naked choke, then Dan Ige ending up on top, landing some ground and pound to end the round. And that maybe could happen in the second or the third. And then now we're sitting there wondering like, yeah, there was some damage landed when he fell off, but how much does that submission count for, and where do the chips lie? So I think this is going to go to decision, and I think that's your safest bet. But I don't know if I would bet actual money on this one because it could go such a variety of different ways. It is such a good stylistic matchup. There is that discrepancy in the level of competition. I mean, again, you're talking about Dan Ige. He's won in his last 5, but Calvin Kattar's got the win over Gavin Tucker, which isn't anything to scoff at.
Murderers row.
Chan Sung Jung, Josh Emmett, who's now fighting for the title, and Moisar Evloev, who's going to fight for the title after that. So the level of competition for Damon Jackson, Pat Sabatini is pretty good, but Dan Argueta, we saw. I like Dan Argueta, but Dan Argueta was coming in on short notice, and he that went to a decision. Like if I'm Damon Jackson and I'm going to be fighting the top level, like I think he left that fight, even though he won, almost as a loss because of how well he didn't perform against short notice Dan Argueta, who's making his UFC debut. Kim Wellkirk, not a great win in hindsight. Charles Hosa, not a bad win, but back and forth there. I think at top level competition, you're not going to see the finishes out of Damon Jackson. I think Dan Ige is a jiu-jitsu black belt in his own right, and I think he's a position over submission guy, and he's going to keep himself safe, number one priority. So I like decision in this fight, over 2.5 rounds if that's what it is, or whatever it ends up being.
Yeah, I mean, I could rock with that. I think I'm going to stake a unit on Damon Jackson, but I have a feeling this is going to be one of those fights that, when it comes down to it, Damon Jackson tends to fade late, guys, and Fuego. Fair enough.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. As much as having your back against the wall and being desperate may be a negative thing too. You know what I mean? That may not be. Listen, this one is really too close to call. I would have to give the edge towards Damon Jackson because I think he's got the ground game. And at least if it's going to go to decision, you got to cater to what the judges are going to see. And I think the judges are going to see that, attempt to finish the fight from Damon Jackson more than they're going to see it from Dan Ige. But then maybe Dan Ige comes out with a more vicious attitude. And when it's in those 50-50 decisions, when it's or 50-50 positions, and he's in those close scrambles, maybe that's his opportunity to go in there and land some extra volume. So this is a close one, man. This is a close one.
Yeah, I could see it being one of those ones that when it comes down to the cards afterwards, you have half the people online going, this is a robbery, and we'll see what happens. This is going to be a tough one. Ooh. Apologies tight too.
It's close, man. It's close. Like I said, I don't think Dan Ige is going to knock out Damon Jackson. I don't think vice versa. So, and I think on the feet, I would give the advantage to Ige. But then again, Damon Jackson fights similarly on the feet with the reach, working the body, using the jab. It reminds me of Chan Sung Jung to a degree with less power. So I don't know. Yep, we can see you, brother. So I don't know what's gonna happen here. Advantage, I have to, or what I was gonna say against Chan Sung Jung. Chan Sung Jung picked apart Dan Ige at his own game there on the feet. So it's a really close one. I'm gonna have to. You know what? No, I feel like mentally I want to go Jackson, but my heart is pulling me towards Ige. I think Ige finds a way to get it done. He's been in 5-rounders with top level competition, if nothing less. Maybe he got the rub against guys like Moisar Evloev and stuff like that. I don't know. It's tight, but I think I'm leaning on Ige now.
I'm going to stick with Damon Jackson. I understand why you're leaning that way. This is a tough one, but I'm going to stay true with Damon Jackson. That's what I was feeling before you started talking, before you gave your argument, before you really brought me over to that side. I was a little conflicted. But now I'm 100%, with Damon Jackson. And to hear you flip back is a little disheartening, but I'm going to stick with Damon Jackson in this one. I think, there's a chance he locks something up. And, to win Fuego's point before, and thank you for always being with us in Fuego and staying active in our chat. Appreciate it. Even if Damon Jackson can find a way to win 1 and 2, and not get finished in 3, then he's won the fight right there. Unless, of course, there's something funky going on. What was that guy that scored Patty's fight all weird for Patty and not
Douglas something.
Yeah, maybe that guy's working this upcoming weekend, but we'll find out. All right, main event.